the film, George C. Scott played the general so well that Scott won an Oscar.
Where you going, General? Berlin! I'm going to personally shoot that paper-hanging son of a...
Patton. In real life, George S. Patton Jr. was rolling thunder, a man who grabbed fate by the throat and made himself a winner. But, as we are about to see, Patton was playing a part he wrote for himself, behind a warrior's mask. Patton loved the roar of the crowds that welcomed him home after victory in Europe in 1945. In the Hollywood Bowl a few months before his death, he might have been speaking about himself.
At this point, I want to correct a grave illusion. You don't have to be dead to be a hero. People always talk about heroic dead. Well, goddammit, there are a lot of heroic alive ones.
A hero. That's how the world saw Patton. A live one, a living, breathing hero. His daughter saw much more. The former Ruth Ellen Patton, now Mrs. James Taunton.
He was a very, very, very complex person. I think the closest person that ever understood him was my mother, but I don't think anybody else ever understood him. And that would have delighted him. Who wants to be understood? It takes away all your mystery.
Stripped of the mystery he loved, the real Patton is only now coming into view through his very private diaries, journals, and letters deposited in the Library of Congress by his family. Some of General Patton's later papers will not be open to the public until 1990, but Martin Blumenson has seen them all and has keys that unlock the mystery. Blumenson is author of the Patton Papers, a specialist in military history. Even he was surprised by what he found.
When I got into the Patton Papers, the diaries and the letters and the other things, I discovered, to my great surprise, that there was a private Patton hidden in those papers. The public Patton everybody knew about, this strutting, swaggering, kind of profane person who was a superb commander and a great military professional, but in those papers there was quite a different person who was tortured, poetic, sensitive, anguished, and quite a different personality from the personality that I think he did on purpose, that he projected on purpose in order to fulfill his military image.
In these papers, the insecure boy, the frustrated poet. In these papers, the long hidden pieces we can now put together for the first time to tell the real story, the story of the poet and the warrior, of their conflict and their coming together in greatness. The story of one man who overcame insurmountable obstacles to become a hero. It wasn't easy. Patton faced a very early obstacle. As a growing boy, he had trouble learning to read, a disability we now know as dyslexia. So his parents kept him home from school, taught him themselves, reading aloud an endless diet of heroic exploits. While others engaged the reality of schoolyard give and take, Patton grew up playing war games with his cousins and dreaming of his ancestors. As long as he could remember, Patton had known his ancestors through countless stories about forebears like the uncle who died charging the cannon at Gettysburg. Confederate heroes held center stage in family stories, as his daughter recalls.
When my father was a very small boy, well, until he was quite old, he always said his prayers at his mother's knee, and back of her chair were a steel engraving of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. And until he was about 15 years old, he thought that they were an engraving of God and Jesus Christ.
As a youngster, Patton had held in his hand the iron shell fragment that killed the first George Patton, a Confederate colonel. The young Patton was surrounded by Civil War mementos. He'd fondled the colonel's blood-soaked shirt.
And being an only son, I think a great deal too much was expected of him. I think from infancy he was under tremendous pressures to be a hero.
The young dreamer meets reality face to face at West Point, 1904. Here and now, he must live up to his past. From the austerity of his cadet quarters, he writes, "Dear Papa, I have lived 19 years. I have wasted them. I amount to very little more than when I was a baby. Though I want to, I don't succeed. The sum total of me is that I am lazy, stupid, yet an ambitious dreamer who will degenerate into a third-rate second lieutenant and never command anything more than a platoon." It was a revealing letter, an insecure teenage Patton under pressure to be a hero, confessing a fear that will plague him the rest of his life, his fear of failure. If that seems surprising from a young man who would rise to four-star general, the facts are that the George Patton who graduated from West Point in 1909 had a tough time getting through. It took him 5 years instead of the usual 4. He flunked math. He couldn't spell. He broke 2 arms and wound up in the infirmary trying for the football stardom that eluded him. He pushed himself to a place on the U.S. Army team at the 1912 Olympic Games in Stockholm in the tough pentathlon, but came in 4th. And 4th place wasn't good enough for Patton, because only 1st place counts when you have to be a hero. As he wrote home in 1909, "Dear Papa and Mama, I have got to, do you understand? Got to be great. I am different from other men. I wake up at night in a cold sweat, imagining that I have lived and done nothing. Perhaps I am crazy. Oh God, could I but see 10 years. His first chance to fight his fear of failure as an Army officer comes in 1916 in Mexico. The one-time revolutionary Pancho Villa has turned bandit, makes the mistake of raiding a border town. President Woodrow Wilson orders General Blackjack Pershing of the U.S. Army to chase Villa into Mexico. It wasn't really a war at all, but the 25-year-old Lieutenant Patton, so anxious to succeed, so afraid he won't, distinguishes himself with an act of bravado. In command of 3 Dodge automobiles and 14 men, he roars into a Villista stronghold, kills 3 bandits, and wheels into camp with a dead bandit strapped to each hood, and boasts that it was the first motorized action of the U.S. Army. The Patton bravado impresses Blackjack Pershing, who is now named Commanding General of the American Expeditionary Force to Europe in World War I. Pershing takes Patton along as an aide. Patton becomes the very first officer assigned to the brand new U.S. Tank Corps. At the front, Patton savors glory, appears fearless. But he later recalled to his daughter that he was driven on by his ancestors.
German machine gun bullets were clipping the grass off the top of the hill, and he said he was getting scared to death. He said, incidentally, that any man who went into battle and said he wasn't scared was either a moron or a liar. And he said his hands were wet and his pulse was throbbing, and he was figuring out whether it was worth it or not. And he looked up and he said there was a low bank of clouds over this sort of a